Umu Talk is a podcast highlighting the lived experiences of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community health workers and partners, hosted by NHPI and AAPCHO. Each episode will feature interviews with our community members to destigmatize topics within our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community, with the goal of providing support and improving our advocacy for our community members. This episode features Adam Carbullido, the Director of Policy and Advocacy at AAPCHO, Alisi Tulua, the Executive Director of the SoCal Pacific Islander Community Response Team, Calvin Chang, the Data Analytics Director at the UCLA Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Data Policy Lab, and Michelle Pedro, the Director of Policy and Communications Specialist at the Arkansas Coalition Marshallese. This discussion is moderated by Lillian Uluki-Viola, the NHPI Public Health Program Coordinator. Welcome to Umu Talk. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Before we jump in, I want to share this is our second Umu Talk. This is a pre-recorded podcast discussion with you all as panelists, and I have a few questions for you all. The topic for today is how our community health workers can prep to get our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander youth to get out and vote. There are Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander leaders. You all will share importance of why our votes matter from our community and how various policies can impact our lives, our ability to vote, and strategies that community health workers can use to support youth voting. The National Association of Pacifica Organizations, also known as NHPI, is gearing up for the 2025 election year. We want to see our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community show up and vote. We understand the importance of voting and civic engagement. Our NHPI mission is to be a catalyst for thriving Pacifica communities. In 2023, we had over 30 community health workers from across over 20 different states join us in Washington, D.C. for a day on the Hill, led by NHPI Policy Council to meet with legislatures and share the NHPI priorities from our member organizations, including the Arkansas Coalition Marshallese, National Tongan American Society, Pacific Community of Alaska, Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, and VROSHIA. We have a broad network of community health workers from across Hawaii, the continental US, and we work with partners in the Pacific. Please introduce yourself and what is your name and your role?
And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. I am Adam Carbullido. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy with the Association of Asian Pacific Community Health Organizations, AAPCHO for short. We're a national nonprofit association of community-based health provider organizations, mostly federally qualified health centers that serve to improve health access and outcomes for underserved Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders throughout the United States, the U.S. territories, and the freely associated states. Just a personal little background on me. I'm Native Chamorro, was born and raised in Guam, and moved to Washington, D.C. after I graduated from college, and I've been here working in advocacy, both on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer, and now in my current role as AAPCHO's policy director here in the nation's capital. It's great to be with you today.
Aloha mai kako. I'm Calvin Chang. I'm the director of the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Data Policy Lab. We're housed at UCLA Center for Health Policy Research, and my organization really focuses on advocating for data equity and building the community's capacity to work with data to help bring resources into the community. I've been doing community work for about the past 15 years. I'm Native Hawaiian through my grandmother on my father's side, who hails from Kailua Kona on the Big Island. And I'm proud to serve the community as a member of the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee.
Hi, everyone. Malalele, maladalava mekeahoni, yakwe, hafade, bulavinaka, aloha, talofa. Had to cover all our bases. My name is Alisi Tulua, and I am in my second day as the Executive Director of the Southern California Pacific Islander Community Response Team, also known as SoCal Pickard. Remember that name. I am currently on the unceded lands of the Costanoan Esselen tribe, currently known as Monterey, California. And I serve in my current role for an organization that's based in Los Angeles, California, which is about 4 years old this year, was formed as a coalition to respond to COVID, serving the community in Southern California. However, there's also a part of our work that is providing direct services for the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities in Los Angeles County. I am really excited to be here and to be among these two giants in our community. And I hope to be able to provide knowledge from my years in nonprofit organizations serving our communities for this conversation. Thank you to Naupo for having us.
Malo Pito, everyone. Thank you so much. I also want to ask if Michelle, if you want to introduce yourself.
I work for the Arkansas Coalition Marshallese, as Lillian said, as the Policy Director and Communications Specialist. I'm still learning my role, so I have a lot to learn. My passion is civic engagement and working for the community to serve them the best way possible. And what that looks like is I'm still learning, so I'm excited to learn from all of you.
We talk a lot about policy and advocacy, and you all mentioned civic engagement. I want to mention our community health workers also, who have been advocating on behalf of our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community on an individual level when it comes to addressing our social determinants of health. And our community health workers from across Noble and our communities have been advocating throughout COVID-19. And Alisi, you mentioned COVID-19 data equity as well. So my question is for you all is, how does the work that you do influence policy for our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities?
When I think of policy, I think of the decisions that are made in terms of who gets resources, how quickly they get resources, and where those resources are sent. And to me, those are all policy decisions that depend on our elected officials, really, who are at the heart of those decision-making processes, because the orders really come from them to tell the agencies how to do that, whether it's at the federal, state, county level. And I honestly do believe that it makes a difference who represents us, because if the folks who represent us are familiar with our communities and the impact that pandemics like COVID-19 have had, then I think that they would recognize the importance of making sure our communities are prioritized when these things happen. Unfortunately, what we saw in a lot of cases was that our representatives, unfortunately, didn't really know who we were. And unfortunately, that meant that we weren't at the front of the line when I think we really should have been in a lot of states where we were being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic when it came to access to testing or vaccines.
Yeah, so I think for AAPCHO and the work that we do, like I mentioned earlier, we really do work to improve health status and outcomes for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders throughout the country, the U.S. territories, and the freely associated states. And we do that on several levels. I think first and foremost, let me just start that, a lot of our work is grounded in federal policymaking. So we largely work at the federal level and trying to ensure that policies made by Congress or the executive branch of the federal government really do reflect the needs and the priorities of the communities that our members serve and our partners serve. And we do that at three levels. First is through direct advocacy. Because of the nature of the work that AAPCHO does, we are constantly on Capitol Hill or working within the Department of Health and Human Services or other federal agencies and the White House to really get to the policymakers that are making the decisions at the highest levels. We really try to inform and educate them what are the unique challenges that are affecting Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, as well as Asian Americans. How is it that our communities may be experiencing health differently? And how is it that the policy positions that they're taking can directly address the challenges that we have in our communities? And we've seen successes as well as shortcomings throughout the years. But over time, I think we really do try to influence that national conversation so that resources that are allocated by the federal government do reach the communities and the populations that need it the most. Unfortunately, we often see that our communities are often those communities that do need resources and assistance the most, and we want to make sure that our policymakers are addressing that. The second way we do this is through mobilization of our community health center network, as well as our community-based organization partners that we have around the country. AAPCHO is a national association that is comprised mostly of community health centers. And each of these community health centers is grounded in the communities that they serve, and they have a mission of advocacy for trying to improve health for the communities in which they live. And so we try to mobilize them in order to influence the national as well as the state and local conversations on how to improve health status and outcomes for Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and the Asian American communities that they serve. And we also have a broad network of community and coalition partners throughout the country. I know that NIOPO and the CHW network that is part of NIOPO is also very closely related to the work that AAPCHO does on our advocacy, and we've largely been very much helped by the advocacy and persistent voice that that NIOPO and the CHW network has provided in helping us to understand what are some of those unique challenges and what are the specific interventions that might be helpful to our communities. And lastly, we have also a large network of national and state partners that we work in coalition, one, to ensure that their priorities reflect the priorities of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders throughout the country, as well as trying to influence the various platforms and ensuring that all of that work together that we're doing together is synchronized and is complementary to each other. We've been very successful in building coalitions here in DC and in the various states to help to ensure that we are building an echo chamber so that our needs and priorities are not only addressed by organizations that provide direct service or direct advocacy for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, but also that our needs are also amplified in other community and coalition spaces that reflect the needs of all underserved communities throughout the country.
Thanks, Calvin and Adam. I think I'll speak from the community level experience as a direct services organization. The way that we influence policy is that we bring the stories of our communities to policymakers, and which provides the context for why these policies are important to our communities. When I think about our community health workers, they serve a pivotal role in being the people that are directly interacting with our community members, and whether that is to navigate them through the healthcare system or to help them fill out an immigration application. They're the ones that capture the stories of our community members around the work that is, a lot of them are doing work around health and health outcomes. And what I encourage our staff to do is to document the stories of the community members that they are helping. Oftentimes, the health outcomes that you see in our communities are the manifestations of policies that are being made by policymakers that create the conditions that many of our communities live in. And so, in order for those things to be corrected or to be done better, our experiences need to be contextualized with the stories that we see are going on in the community. And so I think it's a really CHWs serve a really important role in being able to capture the experience of our communities and bringing those stories to contextualize the policies and decisions that are being made that impact our community as a whole. On the organizational level, I think one of the things that we do is we organize the community, and so we can bring a more unified voice to policymakers. An example of this is something that we're doing right now in California. Is we're trying to advocate for an office that is focused on language access, and right now, SoCal Pickard is gathering letters of support from Southern California organizations to advocate for this office to exist in our California Department of Public Health. And so that's what we do on the ground, is try to organize our community to advocate for something that will benefit the community directly, while also collecting the stories that are important to contextualizing policy. And I think the other part that I want to close out with is that we're able then to bring some of the policies that are, swimming around in legislature back to the community to let them know you are important in this process and your voices are needed, and something like voting is necessary. So we make sure that we put people in place that will listen to the voices of our communities. And so as much as we try to influence policy, I think it's also really important to bring back why it's important for our communities to be engaged in these processes.
And if I could just add on to what I had said earlier, the NHPI Data Policy Lab, even though our focus is mostly on data, we really do see data as one of the foundational pieces for making sure that our communities are represented accurately when these decisions are made, and making sure that not only is our community counted within its disaggregated Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander category, but that our individual Islander communities are also represented as well, because we know that not all of our Islander communities share the same socioeconomic status across many measures. And so making sure that our community organizations have the tools to access this data has led us to develop a number of dashboards in order for these organizations to be able to look up at the county and state level their own community's data, so that they can bring them with them when they visit legislators, to make sure that our legislators understand the position and situations of our communities. But we also recognize that the data doesn't replace the stories. The stories need to be an essential part of how we represent ourselves. We've also developed a Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander data policy platform that we hope will spur some action in terms of all of the data that tends to be floating around now, especially in terms of AI, and making sure that our communities have the ability to meaningfully participate in all aspects of the data pipeline, from collection to analysis to use to the dissemination of that data.
And if I can just add a plus one to something both Calvin and Alisi had mentioned, I think the work that all three of our organizations do is really bringing the full story of the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community to the individuals who are charged with making policies, both at the federal level, at the state level, and many times at the local level. And it really is that combination of data on what is the experience of our communities and the challenges that we are experiencing, and the stories that really humanize and tell that narrative on the deeply personal, often very personal experiences and hardships that individuals are facing, and why it is that we need policy change. And I think it's something that speaks enormously to decision makers when we are able to link the data with the personal experiences to tell that full story. Because as Alisi had mentioned, like, our communities experience things very differently. And we need individuals who are charged with making these decisions to really understand what it means to be a Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander in this country, and to share those lived experiences with them.
Thank you all. You all discussed how your organizations and influence on a national, organizational, and community level, and how storytelling helps policymakers and decision makers through storytelling. I want to note, according to the Office of Minority Health, it noted in 2020 that Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders are approximately less than 1% of the US population. However, we are one of the fastest in growing racial and ethnic groups in the US. Since we are such a small percent of the US, I want to ask, does our vote matter since we are such a small community?
I think all of us are eager to answer this question with a resounding yes. You know, an individual's right to vote is absolutely important. And exercising that right is foundational to what it means to influence policymaking at the most fundamental level. Voting is your expression for an individual to carry your needs to the chambers, to the areas where these decisions are made. And while the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community may be relatively small, I think we've seen over time, and history has shown, that regardless of how large a voting base is, every vote does matter. And when we are talking about a period of time that we are living in now, where there's so much polarization in the policy discussions here, the votes of a very few can carry a huge difference and help sway an election one way or another. I think during some previous elections, the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities' votes were determinative in deciding who won various races, whether it's federal, state, or local. And I think that makes all the difference. Also, we can't only think about your vote in terms of like these national elections. Your vote also influences races at the community and local level, where really a lot of that day-to-day interaction is and challenges are addressed. So, while it may be relatively small at a national level or even at a state level, our communities do make up a good percentage when we're talking about down ballot races as well.
I'll jump in here before Calvin tells his cool stories with data. I think if you ask anyone in our community if voting matters, I think most people will say yes. Instinctively, I think we know that it matters to show up on behalf of our community. We do that in every part of our lives. And so in something like this, I think we instinctively know that it's important to show up on behalf of our families. We understand why it matters in this country to vote. And so I don't know how else to say, when people already know this. It's like smoking. Everybody knows it's bad for you, but it's a choice you make. And also like the conditions that are created that makes cigarettes more available to you or not, right? Like it's the same thing with voting. There's this exercise that we have done with a lot of our young people around why it's important to vote. And the exercise is called, They Don't Want You to Vote. And the honest truth is, voting as a right in this country has been something that over time gradually has continued to change to be made more accessible, to be made more inclusive of communities that are most impacted by decisions that are made by people who we vote for. All of these things are connected. But I bring up this exercise because I think a lot of times the context for the fight for the right to vote is lost among our community. A lot of times because it's not taught to us in school anyway, so we don't know it. And I think part of it also is that many of our communities are immigrants to this country, and so some of our histories are not always clear And the history of our communities connected to the U.S. aren't always clear, right? Like when we think about things like militarization of many of our Pacific countries, the occupation of many of our Pacific countries, some of the histories have been hidden for many of us. And so when we think about the right to vote, many people had to fight, many communities died to fight for the right to vote. And so the fact that we get this right to vote as Pacific Islanders, and I think also folks like Native Hawaiians, our Chamorro community, our American Samoans, whose land is, colonized by the U.S., and even thinking about our Kofa communities and the ways that it has been impacted, we better understand why and the gravity of why it's so important for us to vote. Like we can't, on behalf of our ancestors and everybody that have existed before us that has continued to carry the stories of our community to this point, we better show up to vote. I'm not threatening anybody, but I'm also saying that as I'm not a citizen myself. I have a green card. I'm a legal permanent resident. And so I can't vote myself. And that's a choice that I make. But on the other side of that is that I choose to do everything else to make sure that I support our community and those that can vote, make sure that they show up to vote. And so the ways that our history is connected to the current livelihood of our communities is something that is still very close and very resonant and should always be remembered when we're thinking about why it should matter for us to vote. So I'll stop there so there's more time for others to share. I know Calvin hasn't shared yet.
I think our communities are increasingly realizing the importance of voting. At the national level, AAPI data, they found that about 41% of the community voted in 2016, and that increased to 56% in 2020. Very sizable increase. Still room for improvement there, but it does show a significant increase in the percentage of NHPIs that realize how important national elections are. But I want to echo what Adam said in terms of local elections. Most of the policies that impact what we do on a day-to-day basis get passed at the local levels by mayors, by city councils. They're the ones who determine where businesses can get built. They're the ones who often determine whether low-income housing requirements need to be set for people building multi-unit housing, whether roads get paved, whether it's safe around our schools. And at that level, I think our votes as a community matter even more, partly because so few people vote in those elections. And when there's low voter turnout, that means that it's even easier to make a difference. In Anchorage, I believe David Bronson is the mayor, and he won his last election by 1,193 votes. There are over 6,600 NHPIs of voting age in Anchorage, definitely more than a margin of victory. In Arkansas, the election for mayor was uncontested. I believe the Springdale mayor, Doug Sprouse, won by 4,000 votes, uncontested, but there are more than 4,000 Marshallese of voting age in Springdale. I know that there are challenges to becoming a citizen because the costs keep getting higher and higher for that process. But that just shows how much potential power there is, even at the local level. And the same is true for school boards. So these, I don't want to say lower, but these more local level elections are important parts of the pipeline, because when you support folks at these levels who enter the political system at the school board level, at the city council level, that's usually a springboard to becoming representatives at the state level and then the federal level. And so building that relationship over a number of years, right from the beginning, I think really starts to pay off when folks start to rise through the ranks. So I definitely think that there's room for our community to be able to make that difference and become the margin of victory in many cases at the local level. And I believe these folks, these politicians will remember that. when they start to rise up their own ranks.
I'm so glad that Richard, you mentioned local races, and Adam and Alisi, I can attest to local elections and how people feel and recognize that voting is important. But in my community, a lot of people are like, oh, we don't want to get political. We just want to see what's going on. Like, yeah, it's good to see what's going on, but it's also important to be in these spaces and let people know that you are here, and that you are engaged, and that even if you can't vote, your kids can. And it tells the story and it changes narratives, right? That these local leaders or even these big leaders in federal government entities, like, to look at us in a way where we do matter. And if we can't vote, we'll have our kids vote. And you should look at us as your constituents in every space. And I think I didn't know that number for the over 4,000 people. We had a jump in voter registration. It's good. It's good to get people to register to vote, but exercise that vote is even more important. So I really appreciate all of what you guys said, and just having my people to exercise those rights, and understanding how important it is something that I see as a challenge.
Thank you guys for sharing that. This is a really good segue into our next question that I have for you. Thank you, Michelle, for bringing that up as well. Our community health workers come from across the Pacific, where many are from COFA nations and U.S. territories. Their inability to vote on a national level can make it challenging to engage and understand their voting eligibility, especially those from the U.S. territory. Speaking from personal experience, our community members from American Samoa were understanding in Alaska if they could vote on a local level. They already knew that they couldn't vote on a national level, but we're like, where do we go to find that information? And so we want to make sure that the youth in our communities who are born here in the U.S. know that they have a right to vote. How can we increase Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander youth voting in our communities? What are some strategies that you all use?
Well, I think there are a couple layers to this answer. And thanks for bringing up the challenges that individuals from the territories and the freely associated states do experience when they are trying to vote, particularly for U.S. citizens who do reside in the territories. I think this relates to the previous question, where representation does matter. So for individuals who live in the 50 states, if you are a U.S. citizen and you do exercise your right to vote, know that you're also representing your family members, your friends, individuals, our Pacific Islander brothers and sisters who live in the territories who are disenfranchised from voting in a national election. I grew up in Guam. And for 9 years, I worked as a congressional staffer for the U.S. House of Representatives. And throughout all that time, I was unable to vote for president of the United States. And our community didn't have voting representation in Congress. We had a non-voting delegate to the House of Representatives and zero representation in the U.S. Senate. And the first time I ever cast a vote for president and for president, because I live in the District of Columbia, I still don't have voting representation in Congress, but for president was in the 2020 election. And it really does make it difficult for Native Hawaiian, for Pacific Islanders who may live in the 50 states to understand that their vote is also a vote to help our brothers and sisters in the territories and in the freely associated states. So I think that's something that we should underscore here. And I think, when we're talking about increasing youth vote participation, I think it really is underscoring why the importance of why that vote matters. What Alvin and Michelle and Alisi have all brought up is that, a lot of times our vote helps to influence policies that have a very direct impact on us at the local level. When we were talking about what decisions on what roads to get built, what schools get built, where businesses can set up, zoning laws, and other policies, those are all made at the local level. And understanding that votes do matter, especially for young people who I think now are becoming more civically engaged just based off of current events and what they're seeing happening in their in communities throughout the country. I think just spurring the need for change for our communities is very important. And I think we need to make the process a little easier for voting. So that means, first you have to vote in order to influence that change. So it may seem a little counterproductive or a little cyclical. But we should be ensuring that every individual who is eligible to cast the vote can do so easily and without barriers. I think that, and I hope that our communities are out there talking to their elected officials about the need to improve that voting process.
There's so much we can do to encourage our young people to vote, especially since this is a generation, large part, that it has been born and raised here. And I say a lot because there are many ways that we as community-based organizations can shape our work to be able to really focus in and hone in on what do we do to encourage our young people to vote. One thing that I can share here today is I just led a project doing research on narrative change for Gen Z and millennial Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. It was really interesting to hear their perspectives about what it means to them to be Pacific Islander, to be part of this NHPI label, and what does that mean for their lives and the things that they aspire for our community. One of the big things, or a couple of the big things that really stood out from that research, was that our young people told us that this is how they want to show up in the world. They want to show up standing in solidarity with other communities and other communities that are marginalized, and that they are deeply rooted in the culture, even though they feel that they are farther disconnected from it because they are a couple of generations here now. And then there was a lot of really great things that came out for it. Another point that came out is that they feel that they have a duty to the future of our community. So already in these three things that our young people told us are important about how they contribute to the world, you can tap into any of those individual things to be the foundation of any youth organizing that you do. And so what Michelle shared earlier made me think of a Haunani Trask quote that often comes up in my mind, where she talks about cultural people have to become political. That we cannot just participate in our cultural practices and learn our language and think that that's good enough. We have to center our culture in Haunani Trask says that our culture has to be at the core of our existence, at the core of our mana, and that we have to bring that cultural identity into political conversations, because as you can see, politics impacts the relationships that this country has with many of our home countries. It determines the policies that are being made. And so we have to be able to speak to our cultural experiences and how culture is important to us. I'll shift to how important it is that our young people say the important role that culture plays in their own identity as children of diaspora. You really have to tap into that and to connect it to why understanding the political power that we can build, especially at the local level, is so important. And I think if you center a lot of your work and your conversations about voting with our young people around our rootedness to culture, around our responsibility to stand in solidarity with others, and not others outside necessarily, but also like when I think of myself as a Tongan person, we have a lot of Tongans that are undocumented, for example. And so we have to be able to stand in solidarity with our undocumented population in carrying their voices because they cannot vote. And then also this idea around our duty to the future, right? Like our young people are our future. They need to bring that their desire to be rooted in culture to what they want their future to look like, and really emphasize that they have a hand in shaping what that looks like when they exercise their right to vote. I also want to shift from like talking about our right to vote and as Pacific people talking about our responsibility to vote. I think we need to be able to shift that in our minds. Yeah, it's great to have a right, but if you don't exercise it, then what good is it for you and for our people? I think we need to shift that to our young people to say it is our responsibility to vote, which is, I think we need to just reframe the way that we talk about voting within young people and center it around what they have said are important to them.
When I facilitated some youth workshops around civic engagement, I wouldn't start with a political process or voting. What I started with was an example of the importance of self-determination when it came to shaping our community's narrative. And I think most likely everyone listening to this podcast is familiar with the negative stereotypes that have surrounded our communities for well over 100 years. And these are narratives that were shaped really by colonial forces that has been defining since then who we are within mass media. And that's kind of framed what everyone's expectations are of what we can accomplish, what we can do. And I think that voting is a way to help reclaim that, because I see voting as a way to express what our values are and mean, and for our youth to be able to express that in terms of how they want to shape the future is a key part of reframing that narrative. Also do as part of these workshops is have role-playing exercises involving ledge visits. And so having these students work with each other, one person would play a legislator, the other person would practice sharing some of the data around their community. Another would take on the role of telling a personal story from their community about a policy that helped or hurt them and what it is that they were asking for this policymaker to change. I think really starts to make that process feel a lot more personal and really starts to invest our youth in terms of understanding the importance of voting, because who you speak to in these conversations matters. So I'm hopeful that that type of thinking has only grown since then through the research that Alisi has been talking about in terms of wanting to explore and really build solidarity with other movements, because it's always helpful to find strength in numbers when we're arguing for policies that'll really benefit our communities.
I think I'll add on to what Richard said about changing the narrative is also, and role-playing also is exposing our youth to these spaces. Exposure is really important because they don't know what they don't know. And it's scary, especially for somebody who's young. I know, Lillian, you're younger, way younger than I am. So for speaking from experience, like I was so scared to talk to legislators when I was younger. And this recent visit to the Hill last year in September, I was like, no, I don't want to go talk to these people. They're really high up there. And, you know, when we did the role play, I was like, oh, okay, so it's nothing. They're just regular people. And we had a few youth members who came to that visit, and they were like, oh, I didn't know it was that easy to talk to legislators. Like, yeah, you just have to reach out to them on a personal level. Watch me do it. And not, you know, and having Adam explain, you know, how a visit would work and look like, that was really helpful. I also think letting them know that because their parents are not eligible to vote, it's really important to be those representatives for their elders or their parents or their caregivers because these policies directly impact them. And if it's going to impact their family or the people older than them, it's going to trickle down income and hit them as well, but in a different way. And we want to make sure that everybody's taken care of through policy.
Thank you, everyone. What I hear is that we want to make sure that our youth know that they have a responsibility to vote on behalf of their parents, grandparents, and neighbors that are unable to do so. And we want our youth to understand the importance of knowing they are the future. And by voting, they get to influence the policies that impact their everyday lives in our communities. So I know we are down to 7 more minutes together. So I want to ask one last question is, what advice do you have for our Pacific Island community health workers who want to advocate for their community? But like Michelle mentioned, they may be new to it or maybe scared to. I'm very shy and reserved, so that's kind of scary for me to speak up to people that are in those spaces. So what is one piece of advice you have for our community health workers for advocating for their community?
I like what Richard said, role play and practice.
I think what I would say to our community health workers is we all have a role to play in this. We all have a responsibility to our community in this. None of us can just check out of it, whether you like it or not. And so you play that role in whatever capacity you can give to it, big or small. It doesn't have to be the big thing. You don't have to know everything. You use whatever you know in this moment. You talk to the people you already are in relationship with. You don't have to talk to new people all the time. You can talk to the people you already talk to and deepen their commitment to voting. And so however small you think your role is, like it is still a very significant role for our communities. We all have to pitch in together to this bigger thing. And I think we all are familiar with our own cultural activities, right? Like whether it's a family reunion or a church function or any gathering that requires all of us to pitch in. Like we will show up when something is happening. We will show up even if it's midnight because we understand that there's something going on that we can help out with. And whether that is sweeping, picking up trash outside, or helping in the kitchen, washing dishes, or serving the food. Somebody has to do it, and we can put ourselves into those roles where we think we can fit in. So we don't have to be the person that's speaking in the front and, doing the chiefly things. We can be the person that's in the kitchen helping to make sure that the tables are wiped so people can eat. We all have that in our own capacities, and I encourage everyone to know that you are important in every single role you can take on. You are important to the community, and so, join in. We can do this when we can do it together.
I think for me, something that I would like to leave, building off of what Alisi was saying, everybody has a role to play, and if you're called to be an advocate and to discuss with the challenges that our communities are experiencing with policymakers, I really do encourage you to take that opportunity and have those discussions with them. And I say this because elected officials in particular, they hear from many voices. And oftentimes they are not our community's voices. And they only know so much. They have access to all these resources, but they only know what they're told and what challenges are brought to them. And as many meetings and as many voices that they hear from, that is just a small subset of the universe of individuals who they could be hearing with. So when I was a congressional staffer, I would have meetings every 15, 20 minutes or so, all day. And I would hear constantly from community voices or from interest groups or from lobbyists. But there was such a large segment of the community that we would not hear from. And those are often the individuals who we needed to hear from the most. So if you are called to have those to be an advocate, to talk with your elected officials, I really do encourage it, because it is only through that storytelling that we referenced earlier, and the presentation of data on NHPI issues, that elected officials are going to understand the true need that our communities have, and have the information and the data in order to back up those decisions on why those are happening. And as Michelle was mentioning, it can seem daunting at first, but at the end of the day, you're having a conversation with another human being who who is working for you. Each elected officials, regardless of political affiliation or ideological positioning, at the end of the day, they want to do what is best for their constituents. So when you raise these issues, know that you're raising it with someone who, in my experience, largely wants to be helpful. And they want to do what is best for the people that they were elected to serve. And it is only by hearing your stories and your experiences that they'll be armed with that information, so that when they do go to cast a vote on the floor of Congress, or have those discussions with their colleagues, that they'll be able to say, this issue is also important to my constituents, and I want to see something done in order to improve their lives in my community.
I think for community health workers specifically, becoming knowledgeable about the policies that impact them and that can support their work is critical. There's legislation right now being considered that would allow for more eligibility and reimbursement of community health workers through Medicare and Medicaid. And not only that, but the states that are expanding those opportunities are also considering certification programs that will determine which CHWs are allowed to receive reimbursement. And so understanding those policies also means being able to speak the language of these legislators. And the language that they speak tends to be in the numbers and data, but also in the stories. And so arming ourselves with both sides, the data and the stories, I think is extremely helpful. And as far as the stories, I think it's worth emphasizing to our community and legislators that it may not be always visibly apparent for those outside of our community what these programs can mean for us. And in today's day and age, oftentimes our youth are raised by grandparents because the parents are out working. And what that means is that our cultural lineage passes from grandparents to children. And it's our community health workers who ensures that that thread remains unbroken. And really who we are as a people, if it depends on passing down that cultural knowledge, it depends on being able to support our community health workers who can support our elders and make sure that they live as long and fruitful lives as they can, so that they can continue to pass down this knowledge. So really, support for these CHWs translates into support for maintaining who we are as a people. And I think that it's worth emphasizing that for our own community and the policymakers who have the power to decide whether or not these programs are something that will actually pass in their policies. And as far as youth, as Alisi is saying, I mean, I can only think of the word kuleana. It is really a duty and a responsibility more than a right for those who do have the power to represent our communities to be able to do so by voting. There's one young leader in our community in Southern California, Clara, who has organized meetings within her family to discuss every time there's an election, who are the candidates, what are their positions, who should we all be voting for? And I think that's a great approach because it respects how we see ourselves, not just as individual units, but really our base units are the family unit. And I think that kind of approach to making sure that there's family involvement, even if everyone in the family can't vote, is one way of making sure that we all remain engaged.
Can I also add to what Richard said? I know we're out of time, but voter education is very important. And it's scary, but do it anyway.
I just want to say thank you all so much for your time and for sharing your stories, especially ensuring that our young people and our community health workers know the importance of their responsibility for their families and the narratives of shaping, like continuing to shape policies that shape our communities and influencing voting. Sharing the importance of voting education is really important for improving health outcomes. I just want to say that this is a beautiful way to wrap everything up. NOPL has a policy council, and Michelle is one of our co-chairs. So this is a great way to also let our community health workers in our community know that we do have a policy council that wants to work together to ensure that our Pacific Islander priorities are prioritized within our communities and to ensure we're all working together to get those to happen. So I just want to say thank you all again. Malo Alpito, everybody. And if you do have any resources to share, we will make sure those are available to our community on our Facebooks and on the website. So thank you so much.
This episode was brought to you by NHPI and AAPCHO. To learn more about the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Data Policy Lab, visit healthpolicy.ucla.edu. To learn more about the Arkansas Coalition of Marshallese, visit arkansasmarshallese.org. And lastly, to know more about the SoCal Pacific Islander Community Response Team, go to pacificislanderhealth.org. Thank you.